So we're going to just continue. So, um, we're just going to go ahead and continue the current events in Bible prophecy until the end of February and then stop. So we're not going to go back to the 12 tribes of Israel either. So I'll just continue with this. There's a lot going on as far as what's happening in the country. And one of the things that people don't understand is why Germany won't send Ukraine weapons, why they won't allow other countries to fly through their territory to give them weapons. And it's because of what happened during World War II. They suffered such absolute mass casualties that it was very, very difficult for them to even think about going back there again. And what's interesting is Germany's become a country that sells weapons to other countries, but they don't give them to other countries on a regular basis. So anyway, this one's rather interesting. It says Germany's refusal to send weapons to Ukraine has puzzled and angered some allies, but the reasons why Europe's most powerful country is standing back are historical and complex. There is a great grassy plain to the east of Berlin where the soil still tells of terrible stories. As farmers plow, the blades disturb human bones, weapons, and fragments of one of the most brutal battles of World War II. It was the spring of 1945. Hitler was hiding in a bunker in Berlin. His troops were in retreat. Soviet forces advanced from the east across the plain. Then, above them, the hill called the Seelow Heights. The Nazis had taken up defensive positions. It was, by all accounts, the muddiest, chaotic bloodbath. The Soviets eventually prevailed, hastening the end of the war, but it is estimated up to 30,000 of their soldiers were killed. To visit the memorial of Seelow Heights is to understand how deeply entrenched the country's history remains in the minds of many Germans, and how the horrors of the 20th century still influence foreign policy today. So that is one of the major reasons why they won't do this. And it continues as to what happened and why they will abstain from helping. It is one of the reasons Germany has refused to send weapons to Ukraine, prompting a furious response from politicians there. This is, by and large, the nation of pacifists. An annual survey reveals that most Germans believe diplomatic negotiations is the best way to resolve conflict. German troops rarely participate in anything other than peacekeeping missions. There are a few exceptions, and they were controversial, including the Balkans in the 90s and most recently Afghanistan. It's also ironic that the world's biggest arms exporter, though its output is dwarfed by that of the US and Russia, it is the strict controls of where the weapons are sent, even if Angela Merkel's government was sometimes accused of not sticking to those rules, and we have a new chancellor there now. Germany has a long-standing policy of restraint when it comes to military conflict of all sorts, weapons exporting for the fueling conflict rather than reducing conflict, says Thomas Kein Blankoff from Germany's Marshall Fund. This long-standing policy that Germany does not export arms into conflict zones. Germany has departed from the principle to arm Peshmerga fighters battling ISIS in North Iraq, but the situation in Ukraine is different, he says. The reason is history, the Nazi killings of millions of people in Ukraine and Russia. To export arms in the bloodlands that Germany helped to create, to supply one part of the bloodlands with arms against the other part of the bloodlands is an anathema to the German political debate. So they killed a lot, and a lot of their own people were killed. And this is actually a picture of that battle during that time when they went into Ukraine. Next slide. Oh, I'm doing this. I got the clicker. I can go myself. Okay. This picture to the right shows you why. That whole battle space between Russia and Germany is parts of Ukraine and overlaps with other countries, such as Belarus, Latvia, Lithuania, and many others. But that whole battle space is exactly over the same area. So they're very reluctant to repeat a historical anomaly. Can I have a reader for this slide? Go ahead, Roger. Well, he's bringing the mic up to you. You can just read till you're tired. And you can
well, I feel a little sleepy right now.
It'll wake you up.
All right. The situation on the Ukrainian border is testing Germany's new coalition government. Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who probably thought COVID would be his greatest challenge, is now under pressure from his international allies to shift his country to a new, more hawkish position. His government and coalition of Social Democrats, Greens, and Free Democrats came to power at the end of last year, promising a value-based foreign policy and even stricter constraints on arms exports. Resisting calls, even from some within that government, to send weapons to Kiev.
It's Kiev, yeah.
Kiev.
Yep.
Chancellor Scholz has instead paid for a field hospital, offered to treat wounded soldiers in Germany, and is sending 5,000 helmets to Ukraine. Because there's another reason for Germany's reluctance. Many here simply don't believe that sending weapons will solve the crisis. Scholz, foreign minister, Green politician Annalena Baerbock, points out that Germany is a financial donor to Ukraine and believes that is more effective than sending arms. I do not think it's realistic to believe such weapons exports could turn around the military imbalance. The best protection is to prevent further aggression. The strongest weapon, if you want to use that word, is that we unite as NATO members, as EU states, as the G7, make clear every new aggression will have massive consequences.
So the irony of all of this is who didn't let Ukraine into the EU, G7, or NATO? Who's the one who resisted over and over again? It was Germany. I'm like, what? Again, talking out both sides of your mouth to the press. And that's why I think it's so interesting. So they're sending them helmets, they're building up field hospitals, and they're sending them money, but they absolutely refused to send them weapons to help, and they wouldn't let France go around. Now, again, this is going to be a domino effect. Ukraine, I don't think, is the last country this is going to happen to. He did it to Crimea in 2014. It's a slower progression than the Weimar Republic did in the 1930s, but it's still there, and they're going to take what they want because Putin wants the rest of the world to stop being so Western-centric and to focus on him and what their country wants. And we'll show that in just a minute. Can I have another reader for this one? And just read the first two bullets, that'd be great. Andy?
The situation on the Ukrainian border is testing Germany's new coalition government. Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who probably thought COVID would be his greatest challenge.
I'm sorry, I made a duplicate of this slide, so I apologize. Because we just read this. I apologize. This slide will be fine.
Okay.
Because this is actually about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and why it's important. So this is the one that goes from Russia all the way to Germany, and there's two pipelines, the one that's still there and the one that they're building that they're about ready to open, okay? So they all go under the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. So that's where that is. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Fresh warnings from the U.S. over the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline have thrust the controversial project back into the spotlight. The U.S. has indicated the new pipeline between Russia and Germany will not go ahead, and officials in Berlin say the project could face sanctions if Russia sends troops into Ukraine. The multi-billion-dollar pipeline is increasingly being seen as a key bargaining chip in Western efforts to prevent a possible Russian invasion. So what is the pipeline and why is it still divisive?
Okay, so a couple of things. This whole Ukraine thing, I guess the major part of it is there's still 75,000 Jews who live in Ukraine. And we're going to look at what Israel's proposing to get them out. During World War II, it was one of the highest populations of Jews that was depleted, but there's still a significant amount left. And Israel's basically offered to take them all out and to fly them back to Israel. So the pipeline is a bargaining chip because it's going to, if it's destroyed because of this conflict, it's going to cost Russia billions and billions of dollars of revenue, plus the damages to a multi-billion-dollar effort. So that is huge, and that's why I think we're seeing Putin back off, because he realized we could cut the umbilical cord between Russia and Europe and stop the flow of all of this. And when Trump was still president, he warned that this was going to make Europe completely dependent on Russia. He was firmly against it. Poland was against it. Ukraine was against it. And it's a huge bargaining chip, as they say here. But I think all of this is making the effort of getting the Jews out of Ukraine and back to Israel part of the thematic verse that God says, tell the north to, let them go, to the south to give them up, from the east and from the west to bring them back to their land. So this is where the pipeline goes. As you can see, it's under the Baltic Sea and comes all the way down to Greifswald, Germany. Not the Greifswalds, but anyway, and it comes out of that part of Russia, and you can see it's a very slender area. It has to go around Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland.
Right, question.
Yeah.
How can the West destroy it if it's all underwater?
Easily. I mean, they could send a sub down there and destroy it.
A depth chart.
Yeah. I know. They could send a submarine down. They could send a mine down and blow it up. There's probably 100 ways to blow it up. Yes. Walter? Yeah, it would. It would be, because you're going to find out, I think it might be on this slide, maybe it's the next slide, how much oil is flowing through this. So we'll get to that.
I thought you said it's a gas pipeline. But
Yeah,
that doesn't do the same damage as oil does.
I'm sorry, it's coming right there. It's 55 billion cubic meters of gas from Germany each year. So it's a gas pipeline, sorry. Yeah. So real quick, it says, what is Nord Stream 2? It's the new 1,200 kilometer long, 745 mile gas pipeline running through the western Russia to northeastern Germany under the Baltic Sea. The 10 billion euros, or 8.3 billion pounds, project was designed to double the amount of natural gas flowing from Russia straight to Germany. Gas currently flows via the Nord Stream pipeline, which was completed in 2012. If it comes to fruition, the pipeline will be able to pump 55 billion cubic meters of gas to Germany each year. Its owner is the Russian state-controlled gas firm Gazprom. Work on the pipeline finished in September, but Gazprom is still waiting approval from the European regulators before it can open the taps and start pumping gas. So everything's on the line, because this is basically Russia's chief export. They don't export almost anything as much as they do oil, and you can look it up on your phones. What is their chief export? This is how they're going to make their money, and it's state-controlled, which means who's really controlling it? Putin. He's got his hands on the tap. He decides what goes and how much it costs. So I just want you to remember this map. This is not the only pipeline, though. There are several that go through Ukraine into Belarus and Poland and Germany. So these are extras that don't go through any country, because that way he doesn't have to pay them anything, because it's all laid at the bottom of the sea. So why is it so controversial? Critics say that the pipeline is the tool for Russian foreign policy, and there has been strong opposition from the US, Ukraine, and Poland. So Russia realizes this is my political switch. All I got to do is turn it on or off, and I can tell Europe what to do. And that's why, Trump, it was a threat to Trump because he wanted to have control over there. The US fears the pipeline makes Europe much more dependent on Russian energy, handling significant power from Berlin and the EU to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine also wants the pipeline stopped. Russia sends much of its gas to Europe through Ukraine, but Nord Stream 1 and 2 bypass the country. So that's the whole point. Strategically, this is a brilliant move. I'm not laying my pipeline through the country. I'm going to put it under the ocean so you can't touch it and you can't tell me what to do. This means that the new pipeline in Kiev would lose out on $1.8 billion in transit fees it earns on gas passing through its territory. Ukraine says it is being punished for the warm relations with the rest. Poland is unhappy about being overlooked as a transit country for Russian gas supplies in Europe. So it's back and forth because Ukraine made revenue off of the Russians pumping it through their country. Now they're being bypassed. So it's a lot of a political game, and I'm just trying to make sure we're aware of what's going on. Can I have a reader for this one? Go ahead, Duffy.
Why is it such a, thanks. Why is it such a, I can hold it. Why is it such a key bargaining chip? The pipeline has been touted as a sanction the West could threaten against Russia to show Mr. Putin that any invasion of Ukraine would come at a heavy cost. UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace has called the pipeline a piece of leverage that the West could use against Moscow. Mr. Wallace said the pipeline was one of the few chips that can make a difference. Is Russia preparing to invade Ukraine? Kremlin media, Ukraine the aggressor, not Russia. UK doubts Russian invasion of Ukraine can be stopped. For Russia, the pipeline is important as it pumps gas directly into Europe, cutting the costs of sending its supplies through Ukraine. Those backing sanctions on the pipeline say they would be a blow to Moscow, leaving it with fewer revenues and showing Europe does not have to rely on energy from Russia.
Great, thank you. So the sanctions really aren't going to stop Russia from doing anything. And right now he can just sit there and threaten Ukraine and leave it the way it is. Let me go down to the 3 bullets down. There are other gas options for the countries. Germany can also import from Norway, the Netherlands, Britain, Denmark via pipelines. But Norway is the second largest supplier to Europe and has said delivering natural gas to Europe is a maximum capacity, cannot be replaced any missing supplies from Russia. The U.S. is holding talks with gas-producing countries around the world to try to secure backup supplies for Europe in case Russia shuts off the pipelines. But there are worries about the challenges of shipping natural gas. So you see where we are, you see the picture of why this is such a threat to Europe, and why the whole country could be in the middle of winter cut off. So Putin really is holding the keys. That's why he did this in January. It's 20 degrees outside here in Virginia. You can imagine what it's like in Kiev or Moscow or any of these other places. I thought this was a really good article because it explains why the rest of the countries are scrambling. So just picture it this way. Putin is calling all the shots on one side. He can call the shots on the military, the economy, companies that he owns, all the rest of it. Whereas all of Europe and the United States and Canada and other countries, they have to formulate a united front. And are they united? Do they know how to respond to this? Right, so that's why he has all the cards, and the rest of them are just sort of running around in circles. Can I have a reader for this one? Read. Go ahead, Casey.
Ever tried doing a jigsaw which has half the pieces missing? It's frustrating, it's confusing, you never see the full picture. Welcome to the world of Kremlin politics. Puzzling out what Vladimir Putin is thinking and planning is challenging, to say the least. That's how the Kremlin likes it, keeping everyone guessing. What is President Putin's plan for Ukraine? Is Moscow preparing a full-scale invasion, a more limited operation, or is the saber-rattling simply brinksmanship, coercive diplomacy at its most coercive? The geopolitical jigsaw is incomplete. The pieces of the puzzle we do have are causing concern in the West. The estimated 100,000 Russian troops massed near Ukraine's border, a string of military exercises Moscow has launched on land and at sea, upcoming Belarusian-Russian military drills, the Kremlin issuing demands it surely knew the US would reject, like a ban on Ukraine joining NATO, an end to NATO military activity in Eastern Europe, President Putin's assertion that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, a single whole.
Right? So Putin's not looking to make a deal with the West. He's going to put up the most ridiculous, outlandish proposals, and then when they fail to meet his demands, he's like, well, you did have this negotiating power, but you dropped the ball. So that's why I had to invade Ukraine to save what? What is he claiming he's saving Ukraine from? Oppression against Russian people, indigenous, who are living in Ukraine. I'm protecting these people. That's why I have to invade your country. So the reasons are all made up. The demands are Disney-esque, and it just keeps on rolling from here. I don't know if we're going to get back to this. I was thinking about touching on some other ones. So only 6% of Russian borders touches NATO countries. The Kremlin has a good relations with some NATO countries like Italy and Hungary. Is sold weapons to NATO members in Turkey. And keep in mind that NATO, in the shape of Norway, has been on Russian border for more than 70 years. Plus, there's no sign whatsoever that Ukraine, Georgia, or the former Soviet states being accepted into NATO in the near future. So this is the piece about basically how he will prevent NATO from growing any further, and even the retraction of before it was in 1990. This is the last part I'll read, but also perhaps as an excuse to use this moment to reshape the European security order to Moscow's benefit, to reestablish Russian sphere of influence, and to try to rewrite the results of the Cold War. Putin believes the West exploited Russian weakness in the 90s, but Russia wasn't treated fairly and didn't get what it deserved. So he wants to change that. Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council, the think tank linked to the authorities. His argument is simple. Now the balance of powers has shifted. It's no longer the Western-centered, a unipolar world. You should listen to us and take our concerns seriously. So it's very bad. And I love this one because this is called Putin's Vietnam. It's got a great graphic to show us where his guerrillas are, what they're doing, and the puppet government that he wants to set up. Can I get a volunteer reader for this one real quick? Casey, you did a great job, or Randy?
I just want to say for a start that has been a point of contention, that if he takes it, can he hold it?
Right. Yeah, it is another Vietnam for him if he does this.
A disaster for the world? Russia said today that the drills are a response to a military buildup in Poland and Lithuania, which border Ukraine. Foreign Minister spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, "We share the concern of our Belarusian allies about the buildup of NATO's military presence along the external borders of Belarus. In this regard, Russia and Belarus are forced to respond adequately, including through joint air patrols, regular joint training, exercises, and so on. Observers see it as a smokescreen for preparations for an invasion which the West now expects to happen imminently. The UK warned that war could be days away and has sent anti-tank missiles along with instructors to reinforce Ukraine's defenses. Yesterday, the US authorized NATO allies Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia to rush US-made anti-armor rockets to Ukraine to help fend off invasion. The Pentagon is also set to send another $200 million worth of weapons ammunition, and equipment in the coming days. President Joe Biden said of Vladimir Putin, "My guess is he will move in. He has something to do. He has to do something."
So
All right, before you start, Biden has sent 85,000 troops into 8,500 troops into somewhere nearby, and yet he's said he's not going to send troops into Ukraine. So I don't get it.
nobody understands him. He needs a new press secretary because he speaks out both sides of his mouth constantly, and it's an embarrassment. He's like, a couple weeks ago, he said, we're not going to respond if there's a minor Russian incursion in Ukraine. That blew up in the press. President Zelensky of Ukraine basically said, there is no such thing as a minor Russian incursion. Excuse me. And it was an embarrassment internationally. So now he's got to save face and actually send somebody. But it's like the old West, movies. They're both standing on the streets, it's high noon, and everybody's waiting for somebody else to flinch so they can pull the trigger. So that's basically what's happening here. It's giving both sides time to put all these pieces together. Yeah, so everybody basically says in the talking heads that I've listened to, it's going to be an easy thing for Russia to invade and take territory. But they'll never, because of the amount of guerrilla infighting on the inside and the fact that they've been used to their power being turned off, the gas being turned off, everything being done against them by the Russians, that they're resistant now and they can fight on. So it's going to turn into an urban guerrilla warfare zone. Yep. Mm-hmm. And remember, their total objective is not to take over the country. It's just to set up a puppet government. Then it's happy. Like that's what they did all during the Cold War from 1945 to 1989, was they had puppet governments in all of Eastern Europe. They were still a country, but it was a shadow of a country because it was all the strings were being controlled by Moscow. So this is about to happen again. This is really interesting because the Ukrainian Jews are being warned to get out. It's just like, it gives me chills because it reminds me of the Weimar Republic in the 30s. Now's your time. Pack up your bags and leave before this happens to you. So the U.S. rejects Moscow's demands for NATO to pull back as Biden threatens Putin with personal sanctions. So Kiev, the Ukrainian Jews were warned on Wednesday to be ready to be evacuated to Israel as the threat of the Russian invasion looms over the country. While Russia denies the intent to invade, military drills have taken place along the border with Ukraine and in the Russian-annexed Crimea. These drills continue to be, even as de-escalation talks are being held in Ukraine, Russia, Germany, and France. So people are at the table saying this has to be handled diplomatically, sitting at a table trying to argue with the Russians about de-escalating the situation. Meanwhile, Russia's having military drills in the ocean, and it's just like, wow. How can you be at two places at once? Alongside growing tensions between the countries, Ukraine has been preparing for war and has received aid from the U.S. in the form of weapons and military support, although according to Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Russia has not yet amassed enough troops on the border to attack. He did not rule out the possibility that they might later on. While the Jews were told to prepare to leave, one leader in the Ukrainian Jewish community said he did not yet see cause for concern. And this is the last part of the argument, was against the backdrop of the rising tension, Ukraine hosted the European Jewish Association Anti-Semitism Conference that centered around the commemoration of Babi Yar, of which 33,701 of Kiev's Jews were gunned down by the Nazis, the biggest single massacre of Jews during the Holocaust. Along with speakers at the conference was Ukraine President of the parliament, Ruslan Stefanchuk, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Ola Stefanis, both of which discussed the importance of fighting anti-Semitism and commemorating massacres like Babi Yar that the Soviet Union tried to cover up after the Holocaust. So this is interesting because the Jews there, which I think there's approximately 75,000, have been warned to get out before things go bad. And so Israel is trying to plan, how do we get them out of there? How do we fly up, get them out, and bring them back to Israel? As threats of Russian invasion looms, top officials examine possibilities of emerging evacuation for up to 75,000 Ukrainians thought to be eligible for Israeli citizenship under the law of return. With the possible Russian invasion of Ukraine looming, briefing held Saturday of top officials in Israeli government and Jewish organizations discussed the level of threat to Jewish communities in Ukraine and the possibility that Israel will facilitate an evacuation program. The meeting included representatives from the National Security Council, the Prime Minister's Office, the Foreign Defense, Transport, and Diaspora Affairs Ministries, as well as the Jewish Agency of Nativ and the secretive government organization that maintains connections between Israel and Jews in the countries of the former Soviet Union. Yes, Jesse. I think it was an embarrassment that this was where the highest number of Jews were killed. That's the only thing I know of at the moment. But it's really bad. If you could look up and do more research on it and send it to me, that'd be great. Yeah, they just rounded up a lot of the Jews from Ukraine and slaughtered them, and that was the largest slaughter, I guess, that happened at one moment. And so this is why people are taking it very seriously and trying to get the Jews out of Ukraine, which is why this is significant to us as believers, because we know they have to be regathered to their country. And I see this sort of as a second wave of gathering Jews from around the world, with the height of anti-Semitism globally last year was the highest it has been in many, many years. Can I get a reader for this one? Go ahead.
Representatives of various government offices reported to meet to discuss possibility that thousands will seek to immigrate to Israel if Russia invades. The Israeli government is preparing for the possibility that thousands of Ukrainian Jews will want to immigrate to Israel in the event of a Russian invasion of the country, according to a report Sunday night. According to Haaretz, representatives of various government offices and groups met on Sunday to discuss such an eventuality. Among them, the Prime Minister's Office, Foreign Minister, Defense Ministry, Diaspora Affairs Ministry, and the Jewish Agency. The report said some 75,000 people living in eastern Ukraine are believed eligible for Israeli citizenship. It noted that Israel has long had plans for the mass evacuation of Jews from various countries, should the need arise, and has updated those plans for Ukraine due to the rising tensions. Foreign Minister on Monday said Israel is not currently expecting a surge in immigration from Ukraine, and also noted that the Jewish Agency handles such immigration issues. However, the official said the ministry was looking into issues relating to the estimated 10,000 Israeli nationals in Ukraine.
Now, so the issue is huge. Thank goodness Israel's always well prepared for anything. They're ready in case any nation starts becoming anti-Semitic and they have to get their people out. But even shifting all their power, they probably can only take in 10,000 at a time. Yes. Yep. That's why they need to get them out now. Yeah, because then the airspace won't be available, so that's a flaw, yes. Yep. even on this article, there were such nasty comments, and one of them was basically Israel's doing this for their own political gains, to stick these people in the occupied territory so they can continue to expand. So it's just unreal how the world views this thing, and it's getting out of control. We read that last time, so I need to. I don't. Sorry. Let me just get back here for a second. So we talked about getting the Ukrainian Jews out. Sorry, I just want to make, I've been trying to categorize this so I could find everything I needed. There's two things here that is really interesting. Okay. We talked about the Anti-Semitism Resurgence last time, and covered that the last year was the worst that it has seen in many years. But this is coming up on two more things. One was that Iran denied the Holocaust. Do you remember this slide? Oh, it's not even up there. Huh? Now I can put it back up. I just was trying to, I have to have the slides on the side. So we remember this one when it basically was saying that Iran in the past has basically denied the Holocaust. This time they're saying because of the Holocaust, that's why you're causing all these problems to the Palestinians in your land, because you're basically abused. So this is what I think is so interesting, is the part of the UN that's a Human Rights Council has basically come up with a new plan to target Israel, and they're going to use that big A word, apartheid, and accuse Israel of an apartheid system against the Palestinians. They've boycotted, they've tried everything else. Can I get a reader for this one? Go ahead, Jesse.
Israel has intensified its campaign to prevent the UN Human Rights Council from labeling it an apartheid state, warning that the UNHRC could take such a step as early as June, when its open-ended commission of inquiry against the Jewish state is due to publish its first report. Apartheid has become a kind of fundamental charge that is being used to delegitimize the Jewish state, explained former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Dor Gold. It is important that Israel take the offensive against the initiative to brand Israel as an apartheid state, he stated. Attorney Michael Svard, who authored a paper for the left-wing NGO Yesh Din that charged Israel with the crime of apartheid in the West Bank, said that it was not possible to halt an apartheid designation against Israel. Israel will not be able to escape it anymore, Svard said. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is mistaken if he thinks he can battle the apartheid anthology. Svard said this is a horse that has already left the stable.
So you're seeing what they're trying to do is label slap Israel again into submission into the rest of the world's demands. Casey, you want to read this one? Did you get the mic?
On Wednesday, the Hebrew news site Walla published details of a secret foreign ministry cable about the report, which stated that combating it was a top priority for Israel at the UN in 2022. The goal, said the missive, was to delegitimize the committee, its members, and reports, either by preventing votes or delaying action. It noted that the foreign ministry's campaign was set to intensify in advance of the UNHRC's 49th session, due to be held in Geneva from February 28th to April 1st. It is expected that 4 resolutions against Israel will be passed at that session. It is also possible that a separate report by a judicial expert speaking of Israeli apartheid actions could also be submitted at the meeting. Israel anticipates that the full weight of the apartheid issue will be part of the Commission of Inquiry's June report. The probe is chaired by former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, who has said that apartheid means the enforced segregation of people on racial lines, and that is happening in Israel.
And it's really not. So they've come up with a new strategy to basically delegitimize their government, and Israel's trying to figure out a way from getting out from under this label slapping, and it just keeps going on. Just beyond Pilay's reviews, the mandate itself that concerns Israel, even though the word apartheid is not in the text of the resolution that the HRC approved at a special session in May. The probe's mandate calls for the investigation of an all-underlying root cause of recurrent tensions, instability, and protraction of conflict, including systematic discrimination and repression based on national, ethnic, racial, and religious identity. Israel believes that the focus of the racial investigation is a backhanded way of opening the door to the issue of apartheid. Since its inception in 2006, the United Nations Human Rights Council has created 33 commissions of inquiry, out of which 9, including this probe, have dealt with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There have been no UN HRC commissions of inquiry into Iran or Chinese human rights violations. So you see, this is so biased and such a mess for Israel over and over again. I just was going to point out on this slide, that number there that's in yellow on that page is 62. And almost all the other nations is a 0 as far as the total UN Human Rights Council's condemnations. And there are 17 for Syria, which is the bigger one, and there's almost zeros everywhere else. So it's pretty incredible that they pick on Israel more than any other country. Want to go on to the next one? So this one's very interesting because the UN did pass this resolution, which is about the denial of the Holocaust. So do I have a reader real quick, or shall I? Go ahead, Randy.
In which fiction is now becoming fact, and the Holocaust is becoming a distant memory. Jewish community leaders in Australia have welcomed a United Nations resolution condemning denial and distortion of the Holocaust. It's only the second time in UN history that a resolution authored by Israel has been passed by the world body. The resolution was approved in the presence of a group of Holocaust survivors on the 80th anniversary of the notorious Wannsee Conference, when top Nazi officials planned and coordinated the genocide of the Jewish people. Introducing the resolution, Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan, a grandson of a Holocaust victim, said the world lives in an era in which fiction is now becoming fact, and the Holocaust is becoming a distant memory. According to the resolution, this genocide will forever be a warning to all people of the dangers of hatred, bigotry, racism, and prejudice. It also urges all member states to reject without any reservation, any denial, or distortion of the Holocaust as a historical event, either in full or in part, or any activities to this end.
So that's pretty incredible that that has been passed, because all these other countries are constantly trying to deny that the Holocaust ever existed. Why? Because it's giving leverage to the Jews. We need to stop this historical event from being recognized. It's truly amazing that the Jews sent this to the UN, it was actually passed, and it's ironic. Why is it ironic that it happens now? Yes, Jesse.
Because they are so united in reducing Israel's share of the world.
Right. And also because last year was the highest rate of anti-Semitism recorded around the world. So while anti-Semitism is on the rise, it's like, yeah, we'll go ahead and acknowledge this, which is just amazing to me because the evidence of it is disappearing. So I will skip on from there because we don't take time. There is more than a touch of irony to the UN resolution and how important it is to inculcate future generations the lessons of the Holocaust in order to prevent future acts of genocide, while at the same time undermining one of those most important of those lessons, the justice and necessity of a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. Though resolutions and reports which demonize Israel in the same way in which the Jews have been demonized and which strike at Israel's legitimacy and right to defend itself. Last paragraph, Holocaust denial and distortion are insidious and must be relentlessly confronted and condemned, while the Shia's historical record must forever be protected. Education and awareness is the unmitigated evil and disastrous consequence must be maintained and extended, and this resolution is a positive sign that it will be. So even they are saying there's a great deal of irony to the fact that they passed a U.S. resolution acknowledging the Holocaust, and at the same time, Israel's constantly being demonized. So we'll stop there for today.